Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the KINOVO PLC investor presentation. Throughout this recorded presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged. They can be submitted at any time via the Q&A tab that's just situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Please just simply type in your questions and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company can review all questions submitted today and will publish those responses where it's appropriate to do so on the Investor Meet Company platform. Before we begin, I would like to submit the following poll, which will just appear on your screens now. And I would now like to hand you over to the executive management team from KINOVO PLC. David, good morning, sir.
Good morning, and thank you very much. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for taking the time to dial in and attend the presentation. If we move straight in terms of the overview, the objective of this presentation obviously is primarily focused in terms of the discontinued operations and an update accordingly with respect to that. If we start off then with the RNS that we released at the end of last week and a summary of our position within that, just to reiterate for those who may not have seen the RNS. With respect to the projects relating to DCB, we are pleased that further 4 sites have now completed their build, which brings a total of 7 of the 9 projects being effectively completed with respect to the DCB legacy. As outlined in the RNS, the penultimate project is expected to be built complete by the end of May 2024. This is subject to the supply and fit of a statutory gas main, which has been made at the request of the client. But again, we emphasize that there's no further financial requirements expected in relation to that. And then with respect to the final project, as we put in the RNS, we've received a formal demand in terms of the bond relating to that, but we remain in sensitive commercial negotiations. And, you know, I would like to emphasize that very point. I recognize there will be a lot of interest with respect to that final project, but similarly, with the interest to protect the organization's position as well as our shareholders' position, you will understand there will be limitations from what we can share with that due to the position that we're in with respect to these negotiations. The crux of the RNS was obviously a movement in terms of the cost to complete. And with that, you know, the underlying drivers of these cost increases have been these unforeseen legacy issues, which we'll go into some detail for you with. And unfortunately, with these unforeseen legacy issues, there's been significant remedial actions that were required, which Lee will obviously share with you as we go into that to provide you with that colour. Most of these have only become apparent on final commissioning and surveys at the site as they approached completion. And in certain instances, this has been exacerbated by one of the wettest winters on record. Like I said, we will provide that fuller flavour, should we say, in terms of that perspective for you when we come to that. With respect to the cash flow profile relating to these, the significant majority of the net project costs have already been paid, funded by our continuing operations. And obviously the remainder in terms of that cash flow profile is diminishing and also expected to be funded from the strong cash generation of the continuing operations and our existing finance facilities, which really underpins the progressive strength of the core business and the progress that we're making with respect to that. In terms of the objective of this meeting and the agenda of this meeting, whilst I've highlighted elements of that, we have a committed foundation of trust and openness with our shareholder base. Our shareholder base is predominantly retail orientated, and whilst certainly I have ongoing communications with a number of you, we fully recognise as a board that universe is much broader, and we want to demonstrate that commitment of trust and openness by facilitating this presentation for you, and I hope that is recognised. This presentation provides an opportunity, obviously, for us to have that wider communication piece following that RNS, And we want to provide our shareholders with further understanding, detail and colour of the key contributors relating to the increase in the cost to complete of the DCB projects. I'm fully cognizant that at the end of November, when we made a release to the market, we had an expectation of 3 projects due to be closed in December. And obviously that timeline has changed, and therefore we felt it important to obviously give you some further understanding of how that time frame has changed and what has contributed to that in terms of these unforeseen legacy issues. So with respect to the agenda of the presentation, we will go into the key contributors. Lee will cover off those operational elements in terms of a detail of those breakdowns, how they occurred, how they evolved, along with the related timeframes and associated costs, which Clive will summarise from a financial perspective. We'll move into a summary piece, and with that, obviously, there'll be concurrent Q&A that no doubt arises through the presentation. So without further ado, I'll pass on to Lee to go through some of these key contributors in terms of the movement of that cost to complete.
Good morning, everyone. Over the next 6 slides that I will run you through, we'll go through where the 2.9 million that we posted in the latest RNS that come out on Friday, and there'll be some examples of the large scale issues that have arisen from the final commissioning. As David said, 3 of these projects were supposed to finish in December, and it was only at this point that we was at the stage where final commissioning paperwork was being completed that these issues have arisen. So if we look at the first slide, commissioning of the boilers. So this has been concurrent across 2 of the largest sites. So one was a 49 plot and the second was a 25 plot. And this fundamentally came from the drive to finish these 2 sites in December, and we had Thames Water connection booked in for the 5th of December. So in line with completion. It was at that point last week of November that Thames Water then reneged on that appointment, and that got pushed out, that we decided that we would fill the system up manually. And when I say fill systems up manually, this is not a water tank that would be in a 2 up, 2 down property. This tank on one of the particularly big sites would hold 44,000 litres of water to fill the system. So in went the hose, very manual, but process to continue that drive to be built complete in December. It was at that point that the tank was filled up and we started to release the water up through the communal pipes and the risers, that we then started to turn the water on into the independent plots across the 2 sites. That's when then we started to see pipework joints and water pouring through ceilings. And I must add, this was from a legacy contractor that had been working across the 2 sites. And this happened across multiple plots, across multiple flats. And the only way that we could access this was then to start cutting big access panels into ceilings. And please bear in mind, these flats were painted ceilings, there's carpets down, there's floor downs, kitchens are fitted. So to now start to see water pouring out of ceilings was a real issue for us that close to being at completion. Once we'd accessed the ceilings, it then became evident from some of the access holes that we'd formed that there was potentially some fire collars missing on some of the ductwork, of which we have an obligation to provide a compliant building, and we felt obliged to undertake that work. So it's gone from purely doing a commission on a boiler and filling up manually to now these inherent issues coming through, of which this then flowed into the December and then into the January, where you can see from the picture on the right, where we're starting to then rebuild these properties that we've had to dismantle to access the pipework and the inherent joints that had popped off, redo the fire collars. So now we're repainting, we're re-putting the ceilings back, and we reinstigate that sparkle clean that's ready for the site. And across these two sites, this is the largest summary cost, and it's in the region of 572,000. Another example of a simple survey, and again, this was on across two sites, and I'll explain a bit on why we found it on the two sites, because the first site that we found it was on the third block that was due to be handed over in December. And again, as part of our warranty sign off and providing of paperwork, we've got someone to come in and do the drainage survey that then would go into the warranty paperwork and off to building control for practical completion. It was at that stage that we did the drainage survey that we noticed that the drainage wasn't connected correctly. The attenuation tanks within the blocks were not sealed and were not piped into them correctly. And this was all off the back of a drainage survey. And when you walk onto this site, I must emphasize, you know, you looked and it was a finished site. You know, the car parking spaces were in, the curbs were in, the pathways were done. This was ready to hand over in December. And it was only at this very, very late stage that this survey was undertaken that this was identified. And this really coincided with the heavy rain and adverse weather conditions that we encountered in that back end of November, December, because we actually noticed then at that point that the rain and the water was flooding towards the building. And once we checked the levels were running the wrong way. So now we've got a site that's very much finished that we're now again digging up. And you can see across some of the pictures, the level of groundworks that's been undertaken. I mean, the picture in the middle is the attenuation tank. It was not installed correctly. The pipework wasn't on it. So huge amount of work now that's been uncovered, but to the naked eye and walking on the site, you would assume that this is ready to hand over. So off the back of that obviously then delays the balconies going in, and contractors have work booked in. So these contractors couldn't come back to us in the back end of January, so they've now come in February. And I'm pleased to say that the one site that we are talking about is now practically complete, and it's been handed back to the client. This kind of is where we found the issues with the drainage on the second site, because we found it was the same contractor that had undertaken the work on this site, and lo and behold, we then start to uncover the exact same issues on that site. Fortunately, we've found them before we've got to the stage that the curbways and the pathways are being laid. So we've foreseen that and lessons learned from this one. Again, the summary cost across these two sites is in the region of 397,000. Another example here is again, due to the weathers. So October, November, again, this is a courtyard at one of the biggest plots that we've got, again, due to handover in December. And you can see the sheer amount of water that is sat within this courtyard. Again, on further investigation, it was found that the drainage that was installed by the previously employed contractor was insufficient. So what does that mean? It meant that we needed to install additional vents and gullies throughout that courtyard once we'd managed to eventually pump the water away, and go into the basements and run the additional pipework from below. This then delayed the trades that followed and ensued, and you'll see it's huge amount of work to clear and move this forward. Delaying balconies meant that the courtyard paving slabs couldn't be fitted. It meant that the landscape couldn't be completed, and this was on the back of one of these properties that was due to hand over in December. Again, I'm pleased to say, and David touched on it at the start, this one is now built complete, and we're back in a good position. But inherent poor workmanship that's from these legacy contractors that we took the sites over from. Again, big cost of 332k to improve this drainage, and the prolongation and delay costs that have ensued from this one. Gas compliancy. So this was lessons learned again, and this is on the site that is due to finish in May, which David spoke about with the statutory gas main. So lessons learned from the one that we found with the water testing. So we went in and in the back end of December and tested the gas main that was put in to the flats. And again, I'll emphasize, before these pictures were taken, there was carpets down, there was flooring down, there was kitchens in, ceilings were finished. And on testing the gas mains, we realised that the pressure at the main was not sufficient. Further investigation uncovered the fact that the legacy contractor had installed a 22mm gas pipe, and it should have been a 32mm gas main. So clearly not a big enough pipe for us to achieve the correct readings once it got to the gas and the boilers. So that meant taking floors up, cutting channels in wooden flooring, in the concrete flooring, and ceilings come down in the communal areas, running brand new gas mains all the way back to the incoming areas, and then reconnecting these gas pipes back to the boilers. And this has caused huge delay in this, and it's a huge amount of work that was obviously unforeseen. And you can appreciate, just looking at the photos, the amount of extra work that's gone into this. I am pleased to say now that this is the floors are starting to go back in, and kitchens and all the plots and the communal risers are now being pieced back together. But this was an evident find from the lessons learned on the one in December. The cost of this again is 213k. This one was due to high winds in November. So up on the roof of one of the blocks, and this is the big block again, the roof and some of the capping started to come away in the high winds. And it wasn't until the leaks started to come down the inside of the building that we noticed that this capping had come away. So further investigation as we got up onto the roof. So we've gone to put these cappings back, and you start to identify that within the blocks that there's some cavity protections missing. And as you'll see on the picture on the left, it's where we've now then started to need to take brickwork out of multiple locations around this 49 plot site and put these cappings and cavity trays back in. As part of doing this work, it was identified that there was some external wall insulation missing from a legacy contractor. And again, you know, we need and have an obligation to give over a safe building that is signed off from all of the relevant statutory bodies, you know, the warranty providers, the building control, the client, the EAs, and we have an obligation to hand this building over in a safe and satisfactory manner. So we've undertaken all of these fire remedial works that then showed off the back of that from this external wall insulation to meet our fire strategy works. But this came from just a few cappings blowing off in the wind, and it's allowed us to identify this within the building. Again, the summary cost on this is 278k. The fire strategy one, so on a different site. So again, we get to the end, and this was one of the sites due to hand over in December. Fire strategy client comes along and the consultant to give a sign off on the block and asked us to take 2 or 3 pieces of cladding off to ensure that the correct fire barriers were behind that. And once they come away, it identified that there was a potential issue from the legacy contractor that had been used. And this was the same contractor that was used on the capping site. And this is a legacy contractor. Once we'd opened up the claddings, you could see these fire barriers. So we then felt obliged and had an obligation because of, from a fire strategy perspective, we will not leave a building unsafe. Cladding came down. We've then put in the fire barriers, as you'll see in these pictures, to improve under the non-combustible cladding. And this was one of those that was due to finish in December. Unfortunately, this then pushed the work back. That was completed from a fire protection perspective in January. Cladding was refitted, but the large delays were incurred due to the incomplete works from the previous contractor. The client then did ask us to put some smoke vents on the underside of the walkways, and then we was then in a position to get sign off. And as I said before, you know, it's imperative for us that, and an obligation from the contract and the client, that you get sign off from all consultants and warranty and building providers in the mix. So again, 332k there on a summary cost.
We actually released an RNS at in early February prior to the update from last week, when we had the details of the costs that we could see that had actually been incurred at that stage. And although we were unable to determine at that stage exactly what the impact was going to be on the forward-looking cost to complete, so the cost to complete are what we're expecting the cost to be at the end of all the projects having been completed. We could see that those costs had actually been incurred had gone up, and were going up significantly ahead of expectations. And as such, we understood that there was going to be an increase, a material increase in the cost to complete. At that stage, we hadn't completed or been able to fully assess that. Lee's just taken you through that full assessment that we've now been able to achieve. Six issues there, quite significant or very significant issues, amounting to over £2 million of the total uplift that we are seeing. There's some additional smaller but still quite significant issues. There's a number of other remedial costs beyond what Lee has outlined in those six issues. And on top of that, with the delays and the additional works required, we've got additional legal and professional costs and some additional warranty costs that have come in to secure the paperwork around the completion of the projects. So overall, that's been the breakdown of the significant uplift in costs that we've seen in terms of completing these projects. The other thing to just really mention really is that within that we have made an assessment of what we are able to think that we are able to recover against some of these uplifting costs, and our assessment is included in the 8.6 million total cost to complete that we are now forecasting. So there's recoveries or claims that we're looking in terms of subcontractors. We have done a fairly robust review of effectively the recoverability of those. So in terms of the gross claims that we see, they're quite significant, but we have tailored those back on the basis of the time that some of these things have elapsed between when the works were done and when they were actually identified. So that has an impact. The strength of the overall claim, again, because of the time, can be some uncertainty around what the contributory factors were, and recoverability in terms of the capability of the subcontractor that we would claim against, and their ability to do that. And we have seen as we've been moving through this whole process, not just in recent months, in terms of a number of administrations of subcontractors where we would have been expecting to have been able to make a claim, but obviously in those circumstances there's very little opportunity. We've also, during the process, undertaken a number of variations to the contracts, and those are all around the final account reconciliations, which will be undertaken in the next few months as we reach practical completions on each of those projects. They're included in the cost to complete as recoveries against it. In terms of other component elements, and perhaps talking more on the cash flow elements of things, what we do have and have built into our cash flow forecasts is the contractual retentions that are a standard part of the contracts. There are retention releases that come on practical completion, and then there's retention releases that come further down the line in terms of at the end of defects periods. So we've included those into our assessment of the cash flows. What we haven't included is those recoveries that I mentioned above in terms of subcontractors and the final account reconciliation. Really done that for two purposes. One, because of the uncertainty in terms of the timing of those recoveries, and particularly in what we've looked in terms of our short-term cash flow forecasts. And when I talk about short-term, I'm talking through to the end of September, where we've done weekly cash flow forecasts. And we've excluded those from that period because of the uncertainty of that. And we've done that on a weekly basis, significantly around because of the phasing of our cash flows. A lot of our cash receipts come in towards the end of the month. So we just wanted to be sure within our cash flow forecasting that we had the headroom against our facilities and with cash being generated throughout the business to be able to cover the increased cost to complete that we're seeing. We are running at around about, I think David mentioned it earlier in his summary, that a significant proportion of the cash outflow has happened. That's around about 80%. We do see the profile and with the recoveries coming in, which, as I say, have not been included into the cash flow. But in terms of the profile and the movement in terms of the cash, we've incurred around about 80%. And that uplift up to the 100% is actually greater than the total cost to complete because of the recoveries that would come back. So we are comfortable where we're at in terms of the headroom that we have on our existing facilities and the cash flow profile that we can see on the projects. That through to on a weekly basis, we have sufficient headroom on our facilities through to the end of September, and then beyond that, as these projects become into the rearview mirror, we are starting to see the cash that's actually generated within the business being utilised within the business rather than for DCB projects.
So just moving on to the summary. You know, I recognise obviously what we've shared is not palatable from any of our perspectives, and with these projects fundamentally being taken on at various stages of their developments, when we've taken them on, the necessary due diligence in terms of ensuring the relevant sign-offs being up to date from when they were taken on were all in place. And with that, obviously, you know, the board therefore wants to share the picture for our shareholders to have that understanding of how these movements, regardless of the palatability, have occurred, to give you a understanding and flavour of that peeling of the onion, where one element has led on to another with respect to these. And again, I do emphasise, you know, this is the purpose of this is to provide that colour and transparency. It is not the purpose of this to provide a perspective of excuses. It is provide a perspective of colour and understanding of this. And the board shares the frustration and disappointment of this distraction relating to the DCB legacy. I think, you know, the positive for us now is that that end is in sight, and with that, the risk is now significantly reduced in relation to that. As we've already highlighted, you know, 7 of the 9 projects now are effectively completed. With that, penultimate project scheduled to be built complete during the first quarter of the financial year, subject to this statutory gas main connection, which will then provide a total of the 8 of the 9 projects concluded. This leaves the final project, which again I reiterate is sensitivity in terms of disclosure because of the position we're in with respect to the negotiations. The negotiations have taken time fundamentally due to the client's timeframes. We can only work in accordance with their related timeframes, any other complications they may have from other perspectives. What we can share is that if undertaken, as we highlighted, there is an associated estimation of a 2-year timeframe to build if it is undertaken. I think points to note is, in comparison to the others where they were at various stages of the build, the current site is completely leveled, and therefore this will minimize any potential complications experienced on the others. And alongside this, the costing process should also be cleaner than the previous, as it is intended to be let as a single entire package to a contractor, rather than the multiple smaller packages that we've had with respect to the other sites. Underneath this all, I ask our shareholders to bear in mind the main positive to be recognised here, in that despite these challenges, the robustness, resilience and continued progress of the core business is clearly evident, not only in terms of supporting the closure of this legacy, but in terms of its demonstrable performance that we've shared with the market today. The execution of our strategy is delivering success. And with that, moving into our final quarter, as we've shared in the last RNS, the continuing operations now are performing very strongly, and in particular during the peak trading season, run into the final financial year end. And obviously we will update the market further in terms of this positive progress in due course. So with respect to that concludes the presentation, and hopefully that has provided a better understanding and perspective of where we sit in terms of the discontinued operations, and with that the positive outlook that we have with respect to our core operations and the future potential that holds for us.
Perfect. David, Lee, Clive, if I may just jump back in there, and thank you very much indeed for your presentation this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, please do continue to submit your questions just by using the Q&A tab that's situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. But just while the company takes a few moments to review those questions that were submitted already, I would like to remind you that a recording of this presentation, along with a copy of the slides and the published Q&A, can be accessed via your investor dashboard. Guys, as you can see there in the Q&A tab, we have received a number of questions from investors that were both pre-submitted ahead of today's event, as well as those that have made their way through during the presentation this morning as well. So firstly, thank you to all of those on the call for taking the time to submit their questions. And David, at this point, if I may just hand over to you to chair the Q&A with the team, and if I could just ask you to read out those questions and give your responses where it's appropriate to do so, and I'll pick up from you at the end. Thank you.
Thank you. The first question here is: the risk of further increases in the DCB cost provision now appears to be limited to the final contract. What is the size and nature of that contract, and what provision has already been made against it? Clive?
Well, I think the question is correct, and certainly I think we covered out some elements of that in terms of the 8 projects. The 8 projects are either complete, virtually complete, or with one expected to be complete by the end of May. So we have a good visibility in terms of the cost to complete of those projects. On the final one, there is some element of risk in terms of, I mean, we've seen some unexpected final costs that have come through, as Lee went through. So it's not a zero risk, but I think that the risk profile there is significantly reduced in terms of it's only one project that is left. It's also significantly reduced in terms of some of the issues that have been seen have obviously been verified and checked to that final project, to ensure that it's not a comparable issue that could come out. And to some extent as well, I mean, they're different subcontractors that have been used, so it's not necessarily that there's an equivalent risk across all the projects. On the final project, it's very difficult to say. I think David outlined the the sensitivity around that one. I think that that's probably as much as we probably can say rather than would like to say at this stage in terms of that. Except, and David referenced it as well in terms of where we're seeing that final project. It's the one with the longest tail to it because it's at ground level, so it's it's flattened, it's a flat site without any of those legacy issues to it. It's also a long project. It's 2+ years. And what we will be seeing when we've finalised out our expectations on this will be that will at least be over a 2-year period. The quantum is yet to be determined and negotiated, but it will certainly be over an extended period of time at least.
Second question is, what is KINOVO's current net cash, net debt position, and what is the quantum of DCB cash costs still remaining to be paid? To what extent will the release of retentions on completed DCB projects or contracts offset these further cash costs? Clive?
Yeah. I mean, net cash, net debt is moving on a daily basis, and where we are at mid-March, it's particularly so. I think I referenced earlier that we see most of our cash come in towards the end of the month. So it's a challenging position, and we have significant moving parts on that, and particularly around some of the timings of those. Even if they are and can be very short-term variations against what our expectations are. And when I'm talking about short-term, I'm literally talking about sort of a week to 2 weeks as a maximum in terms of sign-off of valuations and those converting into cash. So it's a very dynamic, moving position. But what we do know is that within that and within those short-term timing differences that we see, that over that period of the review that we've done, we can see that we have sufficient headroom from our existing facilities, and then with the cash that we are expecting to come in. And we don't see that there is any significant risk around any of those very short-term timing differences that we've seen. So it is a moving position at the moment. In terms of the extent of release of retentions, again, I think I've covered that out to an element at least in terms of where we have the contractual retentions on practical completion. Those are included in our cash flow forecasts, and those amount to around about 400,000 over the next number of months that are set against those costs. We're about 80% of the way there, again, as we said. So we still have and incorporated into our cash flow the balance of those outstanding amounts that are due to be paid, but excluding any of outside of the contracted retentions, the recoveries that we are expecting. So we've taken again, looking at the cash flow forecast, a prudent view on that, which we can assess and see that we have the facilities for, but also we have the opportunity in terms of accelerating additional cash into that period.
Reference that retention question, perhaps. There's a further question here. Does financial liability end when these projects are complete, or is there an ongoing warranty liability? Clive, which one?
Yeah. So fundamentally, yes, financial liability does end. We do have a year's defects liability, so any small minor rectification works that do come out, which we expect to be very minimal due to the due diligence that we've now gone through and closed these sites out. So there is that 1 year's defects liability, but at the end of that 1 year defects liability, it does trigger the remaining 2.5% of the retention that Clive has spoke about previously, that gets released once the projects are practically complete.
The next question here is, you've been confident in the past that you've provided for all costs. How can we believe that you've now identified all costs and we will not have any more unpleasant surprises? Clive?
Yeah, I think in previous reply, I kind of said, I mean, I don't think we can guarantee that there aren't unpleasant surprises, but having said that, I think the risk profile, which I outlined earlier, is significantly lower. There's only one project left that really, in terms of that, we could see unexpected costs coming through, and we've got our learnings, stroke checks and elements to be as confident as we can be that we have picked up those costs within our cost to complete and identified any risk areas in which we have outstanding potential liabilities that would come through. So we've done as an extensive a review as we possibly can on that to try to determine that.
This feeds then into the next question. I think you've covered this, Clive, but again, just to close the circle on it. What is the gross cost for the final project? And it'd be good to get a feel for the scale of this and hence possibility liability changes in the future.
Yeah, this looks like it came in quite early in the process. If that is the timing, I'm not sure. I mean, obviously we've outlined the sensitivity around that final project. So I think that it's for the purposes of the ongoing negotiations on it. It's probably better that we probably just keep that one for when we've actually finalised the negotiations on that, I think.
Okay. Another question, what is unique about DCB that means these severe cost overruns occurred? Is there a risk of similar issues being found in the core business in the future? Obviously the presentation relates to most of that, Lee, anyway, but would you like to answer that?
Yeah, I mean, what is unique is these were legacy issues, and for all intents and purposes, these were sites that we took over once negotiations were concluded with each client in a part built state, which is as we've inherited them, and all we could look at and we checked on the statutory body checkoffs, on the EA checkoffs and the sign-offs, that these sites we inherited were at a stage where they were good to complete, and it's only at this final stage that these legacy issues have really come to the fore, which is the difference with the ninth project that David and Clive have covered off, because that is obviously at a flat level. So these were half built properties, and it's difficult to get anyone to come along and want to finish off a half built building that's been exposed to the weathers during that dormant period that obviously we was in negotiations with the clients. And the second part of the question, I think, is there a similar issues, risk of similar issues being found in the core business? I mean, for me, the simple answer on that one is the core business is a totally different business to the construction model that the DCB legacy contracts were, you know, and it's proven that the core business is very, very strong, and the strategy that's been implemented on that core business is speaking for itself, and we'll update in due course on that one.
What lessons has the company learned from the entire DCB episode, which will help it avoid encountering similar issues in the future? You know, I think Lee's kind of alluded to that anyway. Is that with respect to the lessons learned? I mean, I think this only serves to underpin our strategy to get out of construction. You know, in terms of, and particularly again, as Lee emphasised, taking on half-built sites in particular within construction is a risk in its own right, which we couldn't avoid, obviously, with respect to the historical PCGs that were in place. So, you know, I think that the lessons learned from this is that focus on that construction element, and only serves to underpin our rationale for disposing that. Because when you come to the core business, it is a cleaner, more simple, more transparent type perspective in terms of a business, which is why we wanted to focus on that model per se, versus the cash intensive, volatile, minimal margin base of construction. And certainly one thing moving forward is we will not be involved in construction in any way, shape or form with respect to this business moving forward. The next question is, do you have any recourse to recover the costs incurred from the third-party contractors? Clyde?
The short answer is yes, and we've started that process. So we've started some of the legal process and review process in that. From a cost to complete perspective, we have made an assessment in terms of the recoverability based on the number of factors that I mentioned earlier as well. That doesn't stop us from actually commencing the process. That's just in terms of what we're assessing into the cost to complete. But against all of those, from a gross perspective of the issues that we've identified and where they can be specifically allocated to those legacy contractors, we are proceeding with that process.
Next question. Given the detailed update today, why wasn't the company able to give sufficient information to RX3 for them to proceed with an offer for the company last year? I'm not quite sure as to the sort of question of that question, should we say, because firstly, obviously, RX3 did proceed with an offer for the company last year with respect to information that was available. Whatever was available in the market at that time was, of course, made available. So I'm not quite sure of the implications of that question, but I can only reiterate that obviously they did proceed with an offer, and what information was available at the time in terms of the position the company was made available to the market as a whole. Next question. How much of the expected full cost to date has already been paid by cash from operations? Clyde?
Well, I think we covered it out a couple of times actually, but about 80% has already been incurred to date, 20% to go, and as I said previously, the balance that brings that back down in terms of recoveries we've excluded from our short-term cash flow forecasts.
Okay, thank you. What is the quantum of recovery claims which have been included in the net cost to complete? I think you kind of covered that, Clyde. But...
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
For the legal claims, who at KINOVO manages that process to ensure it stays on track and is successful?
Yeah. We've got and engaged with a number of professional bodies, and have also been in contact with a KC. So that is facilitated by professional external bodies and overseen internally by myself.
Is it possible that the final project could be settled rather than undertaken, so that the line can be drawn in the sand? Again, I think we refer back to the sensitivity of these discussions, but at this stage, all options, should we say, are open, and no conclusion has been drawn on any of these options with respect to that. So that is a possibility. Next question, if the final project goes ahead, are we expecting to make it a profit if all goes well? Clyde?
Well, I think that probably comes under the banner of continuing negotiations and confidentiality. So I think that's probably one that is for that process.
And then from what we can see here is the final question. How is the relation with the main shareholder? Is there a regular contact? I would like to say and think that we have good relationships with all our shareholders and are open to an ongoing open dialogue with every one of our shareholders, including the main shareholder. I think that summarizes all the questions that were asked.
Absolutely, David, Lee, Clive, thank you very much indeed for addressing all of those questions that came in from investors. And of course, if there are any further questions that do come in, we'll make these available to you immediately after the presentation has ended, just for you to review, to then add any additional responses, of course, where it's appropriate to do so. And we'll publish all those responses out on the platform. But David, perhaps before really just looking to redirect those on the call to provide you with their feedback, which I know is particularly important to yourself and the company, if I could please just ask you for a few closing comments to wrap up with, that would be great.
Thank you very much. Once again, I thank you all that have attended for taking the time out to participate in the presentation. As I've said throughout, the objective was to provide you with some colour and detail with respect to that RNS and the evolution of the process with respect to this DCB legacy. Hopefully, we've managed to achieve that with respect to our attendees and our shareholder base. Again, we emphasise and share the frustration and disappointment with respect to these legacy matters, but are assured that the end is moving ever closer with respect to that. And with that, the risk continues to diminish on a daily basis, particularly with 8 of the 9 now either completed or very near in sight to complete in terms of that 8th project. My final message here is to reiterate and re-emphasize the continuing strength, robustness and resilience of our core operations. Not only have they served to support the ongoing closure of this DCB legacy, but alongside that, they've continued to progress in terms of that core operations from strength to strength, which underpins the execution of our strategy and the great progress that is making. In terms of this final quarter, as we move into year end, we're performing as strongly as ever, and with that, have very positive outlooks in terms of the business and the continuing execution of the strategy of our core business. So for us now, it is a thank you for your time and to thank you for your support. And with that, we look forward to communicating with the market and with yourselves, either in an individual basis or on a broader perspective as we move forward. Thank you very much indeed.
David, that's great. And thank you once again for updating investors this morning. Could I please ask investors not to close this session, as you'll now be automatically redirected for the opportunity to provide your feedback in order that the management team can really better understand your views and expectations. This will only take a few moments to complete, but I'm sure will be greatly valued by the company. On behalf of the management team of KINOVO PLC, we would like to thank you for attending today's presentation. That now concludes today's session. So good morning to you all.